everybody, and welcome back to Discover North Korea. It is just me today, so no video because no one needs to see that. I've also somehow come down with the flu once again, so I'm definitely not looking or sounding my best, but I am determined to try and keep up podcasts once a week or once every 2 weeks at most, at least until the end of 2025. Let's see if I can keep up with that promise or not. Lots of exciting things coming up, I promise, on YouTube, on Instagram, all of these things, including a giveaway that may or may not be up by the time this podcast comes out. Either way, if you are on Patreon, you will know exactly what is happening because I always post there first, and there will be an extra giveaway on Patreon too. So make sure that you are signed up there. It is free to join me, and you are basically the ones that keep me going here. So thank you very much to everyone over at Patreon. Today I'm going to discuss two main topics. Did content creators close North Korea and the future of North Korea tourism? These are topics that I'm probably going to get quite into and quite passionate about because I am quite passionate about both of them. These will be discussed from my opinion. Usually you all know me, or maybe you don't, as affiliated with Koryo Tours. I just want to firstly put it out there that all the views and conjectures and the opinions in this episode are all my own, not necessarily shared with Koryo Tours and the staff and the wider North Korea tourism industry, however, not necessarily not shared with them. Who knows? Nevertheless, these two topics are widely debated in the North Korea watcher sphere and community, especially the kind of sexy narrative that North Korea closed due to content creators. That is going to be the main topic today. Well, I'm of a pretty different view to most, but the main thing here in that I want to point out, and that most people don't bother to tell you, is that everything I say is going to be a point of view, it's going to be opinion, guesses, conjecture, only. Nothing. I mean, I will lay out the facts that I do have, but the conclusions that I come to can only be, and will probably only ever be, guesses. Educated guesses, and at the end of the day, we probably will never know the answer to the first question at least. Only time will tell for the answer for the second question. What about North Korea tourism and the future of North Korea tourism? The truth is, no one knows, and probably no one ever will know. So, like many things in North Korea, there are just too many layers to dissect. And at the end of the day, we're nobodies in the grand scheme of things. Contrary to what a lot of people think online, I'm nothing to North Korea and to the government, and so have no extra insider knowledge apart from what I've experienced over the years and researched as part of my academic career. All information that is out there in the public domain, it's just what I center my life around. So let's get stuck in. And just as a reminder, if you do want to listen to these episodes ad-free and a lot earlier, basically whenever I finish them, I just upload them straight there, which can be a bit messy, but it gives you some insight into my brain, then do head over to Patreon. So let's start off with content creation. Specifically, did content creators, influencers, whatever you want to call them, close North Korea? Okay, so from the get-go, my stance here is that no, they didn't. A bit of a spoiler alert, but there we go. At least maybe 80 or 90% of the reason that North Korea remains closed to tourism is probably not, in my opinion, due to content creation, and instead is due simply to the fact that North Korea does not benefit from tourists like it did before. The scales have tipped, and now any gains that they have made from tourism in the past has been replaced, and for all the reasons that I believe in North Korea tourism, believe in the ethics of it, are all the reasons that they would be cautious about it in the first place. And I think COVID provided a pretty nice opportunity for them to close and then reassess things and basically decide, yeah, maybe it's not for us. This all sounds a little bit bleak in terms of the outlook and future for North Korea tourism. And I realized that I just gave my whole answer within the first 5 minutes of the podcast, but we're here to listen and to explore this topic a little bit. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. Like I said, I'm not necessarily right here. I would love to be proven wrong, and that North Korea will open very soon, and that they will come out and ask tour companies and say, hey, we're going to open, but you can't let any content creators. Now, that would be a very good indication that it was content creation that made North Korea close again after it briefly opened in March for Rason. But they haven't done that yet. So, anyway, that's a kind of topic that I will talk about as we argue and discuss this case a little bit. So, let's start with something that to some, probably not any of the listeners here, but to most people in the world, people don't actually know that North Korea has a tourism industry, right? When people think about North Korea, they imagine a place completely shut down, impossible to enter, government minders following you like shadows. Yes, there were restrictions. You had tour guides with you at all times, you couldn't wander off, and there were strict rules around photography, but it wasn't as quite suffocating as people thought. By 2019, tourism in North Korea had actually opened up more than ever at that point. Every province was accessible to foreigners. Photography rules had relaxed to the point that you could basically film pretty much anything, apart from the three main golden rules of no construction sites, no military, and to be sensitive when you are taking photos of the leaders or any likeness of the leaders. If you spoke Korean, striking up a conversation with locals also wasn't impossible. So the question is really not when will North Korea tourism start back up again, but rather, why would North Korea, of all places, this hermit kingdom, this closed-off nation, why would they let this happen in the first place? So there are two main reasons. And the reason why I'm kind of giving you a background into North Korea tourism first is that it's very important when we consider how much power content creators have over closing the entire country. So do bear with me on this one. So why did North Korea have a tourism industry in the first place? Well, firstly, image. Tourism was a way for North Korea to present itself on its own terms, what some people call a kind of heritage tourism. Tours were very heavy on history, monuments, museums, war memorials. They got to kind of say their own narrative at the War Museum, for example, who started the Korean War. You might hear a very different story in North Korea than you might do in South Korea. It was a kind of way of saying, look, we're a normal country. We have culture, we have tradition. It was a key policy of normality, shall we say. Every other country in the world has a tourism industry to a certain extent, at least allows tourists, again, to at least a certain extent. It's a normal thing for a normal country to do, and North Korea was trying to place itself kind of on the international stage as a normal country that should be respected and admired. The second thing, which everyone loves to talk about, is money. Tourism was one of the few industries not hit by international sanctions, so it gave the regime access to foreign currency, hard currency. But here's the catch, and this is what most people don't really consider. It wasn't very much. So I've spoken to my colleagues at Choreo Tours, and we kind of concluded that on average, let's say on average, for a 5-night tour, you would be paying around 300 euros a night. The numbers were tiny, maybe 6,000 foreigners a year at the peak. But once you look at covering hotels, buses, guides, petrol, food, there's really not much left from this kind of small amount of money from each of these 6,000 foreigners to prop up the regime or to build rockets or, really not much going for it that would, have a big impact on North Korea. And I think we also have to consider that businesses in North Korea are still businesses in their own right, and they want to make a profit too. So, that's further losses in money. Fortunately, one of the few good things to come out of COVID is that COVID made this pretty clear. When the borders slammed shut in 2020, in January 2020, North Korea's system kept going, and it keeps going today. Tourism was not a lifeline. It was probably a little bit of pocket change, maybe. But it definitely wasn't something that they were trying to get back as soon as they could. In fact, that's pretty evident they still haven't got it back today, and it is, well, nearing the end of 2025. And this is one of the examples that I always give people when they tell me I'm funding the regime, things like that. I'm like, it really wasn't that much. And if you've heard about North Korea's recent, well, supposedly North Korea has never owned up to any of its, cyber crimes. But there's a very interesting heist, a $1 billion heist. I think what some people were calling the single biggest robbery in modern day history, right? They literally stole billions of dollars of cryptocurrency. And when they're doing things like that and getting billions of dollars, I really feel like the tourism money is kind of a drop in the ocean there. There's a great podcast called The Lazarus Heist. I'll put it in the show notes. But it goes over basically all of North Korea's cybercrimes, including a recent episode on this recent $1 million heist, which was just a few months ago now. Of course, the money was still something. So it was still probably a factor as to why North Korea wanted, this tourism industry. But around COVID time, the question then became, was that something worth the risk? Because money comes with people, foreigners, foreign cameras, foreign conversations. For a government that is so closed off and built on a lot of paranoia and control, that is a solid big problem that they have right there. So fast forward to today, and tourism is all but non-existent. There were a few flickers of activity, let me remind you of them. So in 2024, a few Russian groups started to be let in. There have since been quite a few more since then. In early 2025, I would say about 100 tourists in total, maybe a few more, visited Rason, the special economic zone. This part of the country is often used to test new policies. It suddenly opened, and as soon as it suddenly opened, it suddenly closed again. It was open for about a month. No one knows why it... Honestly, I'll say no one knows why it opened. Firstly, why Rason? It was the most random thing. It was so random how it opened so suddenly as well. No one knows why it opened, and no one knows why it shut again. It did shut whilst I was still in the country. So yeah, very random. In April 2025, there then was, of course, the Pyongyang Marathon, which returned after 6 years. That brought in about 200 foreigners, but again, that wasn't tourism. Everyone who entered had to run. You didn't need to be fast, but you did need to at least walk or jog the course. We were there as a running delegation. It was, not a group of holidaymakers, so not tourism, doesn't count. Rason is the only bit of tourism, as well as these Russian groups. However, it was after Rason and the Pyongyang Marathon, not after any of the Russians who have also been making very bizarre, interesting content, by the way, that this speculation that influencers closed North Korea came about. North Korea really closed very abruptly in March for Rason, and this led to a lot of speculation. This combined with the fact that North Korea has, ever since been so hesitant to reopen its doors. So, this is where we're going to shift the conversation to talk more about content creators in this story. So, over the past decade, and I guess with the rise of content creators and influencers, vloggers, that kind of thing, North Korea has become like a real magnet for vloggers, right? Think about it. The country is very mysterious. It's hard to get into. Well, now it is. Before, it was seemingly hard to get into, whereas it was actually very easy to go. It's just most people didn't realize. And because of this, anything filmed there really grabs attention. Actually, on my recent trip to Rason, it was kind of crazy because I was in a group of about 8 or 10 people, and out of them, it must have been 6 or 7 of them who were influencers. That's not a coincidence, it's a real pull of exclusivity. And I think that is a whole topic of conversation in itself. How many people, also the rise in influencers and content creators going to Afghanistan. This has been picked up by the mass media. I myself have given a lot of interviews. The mass media have really picked up on these content creators going to Afghanistan. And I start to wonder how many people are doing this because they're interested in the country, and how many people are doing this because they see how much traction it gains on social media, and therefore decide that they want a slice of the engagement and of the money that it comes with. So I think that's probably a very interesting thing to think about, and there's definitely, some truth behind people just going there just basically for the sake of, creating a video that's definitely going to make you some money on social media, or at least get you fame, get you the engagement, because any video that you put out on North Korea, it's pretty guaranteed to do well. It's this kind of pull of exclusivity around the country. So for creators, it's a perfect content machine. Guaranteed clicks, guaranteed engagement. For North Korea, though, it's definitely a double-edged sword, because influencers don't always play by the script. And obviously, influencers are gonna, most of them, as I was discussing with Anna on the podcast last week, most influencers, I would say honestly, go in with a mindset, with a certain framing, with a lot of prejudice already there, and they have the video that they want to make. They are going into North Korea as this crazy person. Oh my gosh, I was so brave to go into North Korea. I was so look how crazy I am, that kind of thing. And so in order to keep up this sensationalist narrative, they need to keep up the sensational experience that they have there, even though I guarantee you that it was way more normal than they presumed it was going to be. So they have to pluck things out of nowhere so that it maintains this, oh my god, yeah, it was crazy kind of vibe. Because honestly, North Korea is really not that crazy in terms of what you see there as a tourist, right? That's one of the things I say about North Korea, is that it's pleasantly underwhelming. You expect, because of what you've seen and heard in the media, that you're going to be walking around the streets and, there's going to be people watching you, or that there's going to be military parades, or that there's going to be, just it's going to be crazy, right? But actually it's kind of pleasantly underwhelming. It's pretty normal. There's just people walking around. They don't care that you're there or not. So influencers will basically say what they want when they come out of North Korea, which, they have every right to. What I don't believe they have a right to do is to lie and blatantly twist things. I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that's ethical. People talk about the ethics of what I put out on social media, just showing the positive side. Is it any better to show an entirely fake and untrue side? No. But yeah, influencers can say what they want to say, and that's exactly what they did when they came out of Rason. There was a flurry of, newspapers and things like that after the first few people came out of Rason. There was one YouTuber, Mike OK, who went in 2025 March, or February, the first Rason trip in February. And he gave a few statements to the BBC. A few people did on the first few people back to the country. He put out a video that has racked up nearly 10 million views at this point. He claimed, also on a podcast, half joking, kind of half serious, that he personally had closed North Korea. And I think that he was saying this in reference to some bad things that he'd said about North Korea after. To be honest, I'd seen worse content come out of North Korea. But a lot of the things that came out surrounding Rason were not flattering at all. And there's a reason for that. Rason, it's not Pyongyang. Rason was never a really, wow, this is so developed kind of area. And Rason really hadn't changed in the past 5 years. It really hadn't developed. The hotels there are a bit shabby anyway. The whole place is a bit shabby compared to the rest of the country. And so, there's really you can have a lot of, things that you want to say about that. There was even a quote in the BBC from one of the tourists that went that literally said, that the roads were awful, the buildings were strange, and the sidewalks wobbly, and kind of asked, if this is the best they can show us, what's hidden away. And I think little things like that are obviously, not great for North Korea. This kind of publicity isn't flattering. In North Korea, I'm not sure that the phrase "no press is bad press" really holds true. But it feeds into a much bigger pattern. Western media coverage of North Korea has always been shaped by sensationalism because the country's so hard to access. Most reporting relies on, defectors, South Korean intelligence, policy think tanks, things like these. These aren't neutral sources, and the result is often exaggerated or one-sided. There's this kind of anything goes attitude to reporting on North Korea that you won't find newspapers or the Western media, wouldn't do that with any other country. They wouldn't first print a story based solely on rumors, present it as fact, and then have to deal with it later if it turns out not to be true. There is strict editorial guidelines that a lot of these papers usually adhere to, but in reality, there's no one that is gonna kind of pick you up on things. If you report wrongly on North Korea, no one's gonna say anything because it's North Korea. And that means that even if fake news is printed or, news that is then turns out to not be true, that barely a correction's ever made. So anyway, now you have the perfect storm, right? You've got the influencers, you've got the traditional media already painting North Korea as bizarre and dangerous, and creators amplifying this through, content designed for its virality. This has kind of led to this very tempting narrative that these content creators embarrassed North Korea so badly that the country shut its doors again. That content creators closed North Korea. It's a simple story. It's dramatic, it's sexy, the media loves it, and also it offers a very simple, clear answer to, a really, really frustrating question for many at the moment. Why is North Korea still closed? But is this true? Is this a true answer? Well, I told you at the start already, in my opinion, the short answer, no. And so let me try and speak through this now. So North Korea has never had good press. Never. Even before 2020, YouTubers, travel bloggers, they were putting out videos, often really unflattering. The government has always known this, and yet tourism carried on. If bad coverage was going to shut the industry down, that probably would have happened years ago, or there would have been some kind of backlash, at least at the time when it was happening, if it was, really affecting them, if they really didn't like it. Why would they have continued to relax the rules on cameras and photos instead of making them, more strict as this footage was coming out? Tour operators will confirm this. At Choreo Tours, we've never had any indication that influencers were considered a problem by, North Korean partners that we constantly speak with. For me, it's just such a simple answer of if content creators were the problem, then the stakeholders in North Korea who really want tourism to restart would just be able to tell us, please ban content creators. And then we would just ban content creators. And then that would be fine. It would be very simple. Journalists are banned from coming on our tours. And with an ever blurred line between content creators and journalists, well, there you have it, Content creators and journalists are banned. But no, we have never received any indication from anyone in Pyongyang to suggest that the reason why the borders are still closed, or the reason why the borders closed in March 2025 is because of content creators. Why close the borders now? Well, the likelier answer is much simpler. Probably something to do with control. COVID gave the country the perfect excuse to, retreat from outside contact, and maybe they've decided they prefer it that way. Foreign currency is useful, sure, but foreigners themselves are risky. So this influencer angle really makes for catchy headlines, but it reduces a really complex policy decision, into a simple cause and effect. It gives us a neat answer when reality, is probably much murkier. North Korea is clearly, in my opinion, trying to balance this exposure against control, and right now, control is the one that's winning. North Korea, these scales have finally tipped, whereas they had trade-offs before when they had tourism. Sure, tourism brought money, it brought normality. But at the same time, the trade-off was that foreigners were in the country, and in a country where, control is so important, that was obviously a really big trade-off. And I think the scales might have tipped. So what I find really interesting is, content creators may not have closed North Korea. They might have done, okay? I'm not saying I have the exact answer here. But what they really did do is, they kind of turned it into a stage. Like one where the country is consumed less as a place people live in and more as content. It's spectacle, entertainment. And I think that that's how North Korea is in our media at the moment. And that is what I constantly try and do every single day, is show this human side to North Korea, rehumanize the narrative, because North Korea in the media is just there for our pleasure at the moment. It is just there for our pleasure. We ridicule, we laugh, we joke, we disrespect, and it is just there for our pleasure. When, the reality is that millions of people live there, and also a lot of them suffer. And when we are just having fun, making fun of a lot of the things that we find crazy, it really doesn't help, the wider North Korea issue. And some of this content really did annoy and affect me. I'm just going to go off on a slight little tangent here, because I spend a lot of my time trying to, do one thing, and then just with one viral video from a random person who went there one time, it undoes so much of my work. And it affects me because I was there, and a lot of it that was produced was just blatant lies and just ridiculous, sensationalist narratives, and people profiting basically from the North Koreans. People call me out all the time for making money and profiting from the evil North Korean government, when at the end of the day, that's exactly what these creators were doing. They saw the crazy, the more crazy they made their videos, the more it blew up. They actively profited in engagement, and also probably money, by using the North Korean issue to their advantage. So who's getting paid now for making content on North Korea? One clear use of this, and I'm gonna call people out at this point, okay, because I'm a bit feisty today. One clear use of this was this German guy, and he goes by the handle of Travel for Love, with 2 L's, Travel for Love, who claimed he found secret concentration camps. Okay? This is actively using the North Korean people's suffering for his own personal gain. And he saw nothing wrong with it. I called him out personally, and he literally told me, I see nothing wrong with it. Not only was this video just a blatant lie, but it is so wrong to call a simple farm unit a concentration camp, denying the horrors of actual concentration camps. It makes no sense. And also, why? Why would North Korea put a secret concentration camp on a tourist route? I mean, come on. And everyone needs to make their mind up. Is North Korea all fake, and therefore how would they ever let this happen? Or isn't it, and he really did so easily just happen to come across one of North Korea's most secretive locations? It's very frustrating, because I can't win against these content creators, because I have ethics, and I have good moral conduct, and I refuse to be sensationalist in what I post, and indeed, that's the entire point of my accounts, to go behind the headlines. But the problem is no one wants to go behind the headlines. Most people don't want to know the real North Korea, and that's the truth. Most people want the crazy, and I don't really know what to do about that. So another video, I'll put the handle below, Lewis Travel SYT, he claimed that the Pyongyang Zoo was fake, and that visitors were deliberately staged. I literally called him out on this one too, and he told me he saw nothing wrong with it. This one really annoyed me the most because I'm in that video with my colleague Greg, and it's frustrating that I'm there and he's saying that it's all fake. I called him out on this and we had a chat, and he said that he's basically created his travel account because he wanted to capitalize on all of the engagement that he's getting from the North Korean videos. Another creator, Janet Newenham, who mentioned she listens to this podcast. So I'm sorry, Janet, but I've already, chatted with you privately on social media about this. But I believe that some of the videos that you made were not correct. They're not ethical. They're not right. She made a video suggesting that tourists were served dog meat, despite the fact that this is like a seasonal delicacy served in the summer and only available on request and at an additional cost. She also suggested that, people and her group were placed under 24/7 surveillance just because a cameraman accompanied their group. This cameraman is literally there to make a tourist film, which I think that you bought, to make a tourist film at the end of your trip. Like it's like a souvenir that they sell for like 20 or 30 euro. And that's why he's there. He's not surveillancing you. He's not following you around 24/7. He's not watching you whilst you sleep. He is just there to record your happy memories in the country. But you can see in the comment section, people really, really believe these videos, and it's frustrating because they don't question it, because it goes with the current narrative of North Korea. It goes with the crazy North Korea narrative. They question my videos because it goes against the narrative. No one believes that my videos are real. If you listen to my episode next week, I talk to Nick Bonner about Pyongyang International Film Festival and how wonderful that is for engagement. It's a really great episode. I already recorded it with him. It's honestly one of my favorite episodes so far, if I haven't turned you off from the podcast with my ranting and raving today. So I really recommend to listen to it. But he gives quite a few anecdotes of things that have gone on in the festivals he's attended over the 2 decades. But one thing he notes is that a lot of filmmakers have been deterred from submitting films this year because everything that's going on with DPRK relations, especially with the US and the wider issue. And of course, things people see in media on North Korea is going to scare them off too from any form of, engagement. Submitting a film to Pyongyang International Film Festival is one thing, but what about donating to NGOs or humanitarian aid organizations? Why would anyone want to donate to help the people in this country when we dehumanize them so much and ridicule them and, basically use the country for our pleasure, right? I use this example a lot, but a friend once told me about a school that used to have a volunteer English teaching program in North Korea. Teachers would go and teach English for free. In the end, they had to stop sending teachers, not because of any danger or something like that, but because the school was worried that the parents of the children also being taught by the teachers who had been to North Korea would complain because their kids are being taught by teachers who had been to North Korea. Somehow having gone to North Korea makes them tainted. That's how bad of a reputation North Korea has, and this is the direct human impact that the negative and sensationalist press is having on normal, average, everyday North Koreans. It's going against the humanitarian cause and actively not helping it. What I do here is try to even the stakes out a bit, rehumanize that narrative, and remind people that behind the politics, the rockets, and all of that, there is a notion of normal people that just go about their daily lives, many of which are in need of international assistance. And it baffles me how many people both care and don't care about the North Korean issue. As soon as I post something controversial, and by controversial I generally mean neutral about North Korea, something that simply doesn't show the negatives, everyone is suddenly an activist caring about the North Koreans. How can you do this when the population is starving? What about the people in the camps? Yes, what about them? What about the people who are starving? What are you doing about that? And generally they then shut up. I recently engaged in one of these in my messages and asked the guy calling me out what he's doing, and his best answer was, I'm not spreading propaganda. Okay, so basically nothing? Is that better? Obviously, I believe in what I'm doing and I believe in the cause. Not everyone does. Not everyone has to agree with me. That's fine. But if you really disagree with what I'm doing and you really care about the issue that much, then surely you should be doing something yourself too. So, Unfortunately, I'm probably preaching to the choir a bit, but I hope it might give you the words potentially to kind of articulate and argue the case to a friend who shows you next time some kind of crazy content, and you can prove to them that, hey, yeah, actually that's not true. And also, this is why content like that is not good. Maybe. Anyway, now I will take a breather. I obviously feel very passionate about this issue, and I do understand it's a very complex issue. I've been creating content on North Korea for 5 years now. I've been working in the industry for about 8 years. It's been a journey. It's had many different levels. It's especially tough at the moment, I'm not gonna lie, because as soon as I started creating on TikTok, that's when things really blew up. I have, about 250,000 followers on TikTok. TikTok is absolutely fine in a way because I upload a video there and I close down the app and I never read any of the comments. And that doesn't matter because it's TikTok, okay? I spent years building up my Instagram community, about 5 years now, just over 5 years, maybe about 6 years. I spent years building it up and I loved my Instagram community because Instagram used to work that, it's a very tight-knit kind of community. And someone who sees your post is not going to see your post for the first time and then never see it again. People who are in Instagram are like more invested. That's how it used to be. It was like a real little home to be in. And so I didn't have to explain myself in every new post and every new video why I do what I do, why I believe it's ethical, why I'm not, I'm not a spy, I'm not working for the government. And yes, I understand that this can be seen as propaganda. Yes, I understand that it looks like I'm, supporting a country at some points, but that's not what this is about. I didn't have to explain all of that because people generally knew it and generally would look at my content and scroll through a few things instead of just looking at one reel that pops up. But now, because Instagram has reels and it pushes content out to new users and things like that, sure, I have more followers on Instagram, but it makes it really hard. It makes it really hard to use. Every day I get messages, comments, actually more and more, whilst previously there used to just be the odd person who would message or comment. Now I would say it's tipped over into about 60%, over 50% of people are commenting against what I'm doing. And that really demotivates you to keep posting, to be honest, and it leaves you very vulnerable because with Instagram, it's a community and I want to engage, I want to chat with people, but there's only so much that you can take. So let's finish by concluding with the future of North Korea tourism. And the future, in my opinion, may be a bit bleak, unfortunately, I fear. If you'd asked me a year ago whether North Korea would reopen to tourism, my answer would have been blunt. No, not anytime soon. After 5 years of closure, I had moved on a little bit. I'd started to move on. I've gone over this story many times before, but basically what I was doing for the past 5 years was centering my life around North Korea opening. I'd made sure I was based in East Asia so that I could jump over to North Korea at the drop of a hat. I made sure that I, could move back to Beijing if needed. I didn't get a new job because I wanted to be able to carry on this job, for whenever they suddenly opened, things like that. I'd basically, gone into academia, did a couple of masters, now doing my PhD. All of that is surrounded by North Korea. After 5 years of that, though, man, I had to, for my own sanity, I had to move on a little bit. So I started investing my energy a little bit elsewhere, but then came February 2025, and for a brief moment it felt like the doors were creaking open again. Rason welcomed a small group of foreigners, and for those watching closely, it was a real glimmer of optimism. Maybe it was going to be a slow opening, who knows? However, as I've already said, and as you all know, the borders closed again after just a couple of group tours. Now, we didn't anticipate the doors to continue to be closed. It was an optimistic closing, like maybe a week or two. So here we are. 5 years on, almost 6 years at this point, from the initial COVID closure, and strangely, tourism feels further away than ever. up until this year, I would say, up until the recent Rason closure, I would say that every year that tourism remained closed, we were closer to an opening. You know, when it was closed for 1 year, it's like, oh, it's been closed for a year already. It's got to open soon. Same thing in after 2 years. It's been closed for 2 years already. It's got to open soon. Same thing after 3 years, right? So every year that it wasn't open, it was closer to opening. But it doesn't feel like that anymore. Now it feels like, hey, this could be here for the long haul. I promise, I'm not upset, I'm not crying. I have a cold, like I said. And part of the reason is that honestly, tourism was never central to North Korea's policy in the first place. If Pyongyang wanted to prioritize money, it could have only allowed Chinese tourists. They're the bulk of the visitors anyway. When I said 6,000 foreign tourists at the start of this podcast, that's like Western tourists. That doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of Chinese that would go there as well. You know, if that was what Pyongyang wanted to do, they could have only ever allowed Chinese tourists. That would have brought in them tons of money. You know, keep everyone out. They're less risky as a population, right? And from a friendly country. That would have brought in revenue without the political risks. But tourism was never just about economics. Historically, it was about the symbolism. By inviting foreigners in, North Korea could project normality, signal its willingness to engage with the outside world. But that's shifted now. The past 5 years have been really formative. North Korea has been more isolated than at any point in recent memory. We've got sanctions that forced, the tens of thousands of foreign North Korean workers to go back to North Korea. All of the Pyongyang style or North Korean restaurants that you used to find all over the world, they've closed down. North Koreans are not allowed to work abroad anymore, and Pyongyang has really doubled down on its own survival through other means. Cyber activities, illicit trade, deepening strategic partnerships with certain countries. It also now has nuclear weapons. It's endured 3 leadership transitions, and against all odds, it's still standing and still pretty darn strong. So in that context, normality, the thing that tourism was meant to signal, just doesn't seem necessary anymore. It is a big player on the global stage. Politicians are constantly talking about North Korea. There could be another little shift here that I will just touch upon as well, is that tourism may, whilst it's not a way to generate income or show off normal life, instead it could be a kind of bargaining chip, right? A tool of diplomacy. Which means if tourism does return, it probably won't be the normal tourism that we saw before. It might start off with, these carefully managed, limited to select groups, like to the Russians, like to groups like the Korean Friendship Association, who are very tied to North Korea through political connections. And the Russian connection really shows how this could work. Over the past few years, Pyongyang has tightened its ties with Moscow, sending its troops to Ukraine, hosting Russia's ambassador at the Kalma resort recently, and allowing for these kind of Russian tourist groups. These tourist groups going in definitely feels more like an alliance, a strategic kind of move tied directly to political alliances than anything else, than a slow opening to tourism or anything to do with tourism, to be honest. And so, with this, I will leave you with the inevitable question that this podcast is named after, and that I keep asking, and that you know the answer to from me, but I want to hear from you. Now you have all this information that I've provided you with. Do influencers still play a role in this? My gosh, after considering all of these things, can we really consider that influencers, these, people who are really irrelevant to North Korea in the bigger picture, did they really play a role in shutting down North Korea and ensuring that North Korea tourism does not start again? Really? With so much in North Korea, decisions rest on a high-level strategy, not YouTube content. The government cares about survival, legitimacy, and power, not a handful of vlogs. That said, we can't ignore this content completely. It feeds into the conversation, both inside and outside the country, about how North Korea is perceived. And, that's That's important to North Korea. But is it that important? 100%? It's probably more likely to be a small piece of a very big pie that is contributing to the lack of tourism. But actually, where it gets really interesting and where we can have a definitive answer, to be honest, is when we see now these Russian tourists. So we've got, on the one hand, friendly nation, Russian tourists, political ally, okay? They are going in and they're starting to share their own accounts on YouTube. So now we have Russian influencers critical of North Korea, just like Western influencers. What is Pyongyang going to do about this? What is North Korea going to do about this? There have been videos made already. And I think this will be the clearest indicator of the impact that influencers and content creators have on North Korea being so closed off as it is today. If these Russians get banned, yeah, it could be a clear sign. Or maybe even the Russians will be told, okay, you're not allowed to film anymore, you're not allowed to upload any content. Let's see. But I think the way they handle this Russian tourism could give us the clearest answer yet to this content creator dilemma. And until then, the future of North Korea tourism is unresolved. Speculation is everywhere, but certainty is scarce, which is generally how it works in the North Korea industry. Maybe COVID really is still the simplest explanation. Maybe it's still just down to COVID. And so to answer the second question once and for all, will North Korean tourism restart? Yes, I'm sure it will, eventually. But at first, probably not in the way that it used to, and probably not right away, soon. Probably not this year. Maybe not even next year, or the year after, or the year after, or the year after. Who knows? We can only hope that I'm wrong, and we can only hope that it will be much sooner rather than later. And as history has proven to us, anything can happen in North Korea, okay? No one, I'm telling you, nobody could have predicted that in February 2025, Rason, of all places in North Korea, Rason would open, okay? So anything can happen in North Korea tourism. There are many people, many stakeholders at various different levels who want various different things in North Korea, okay? Just imagine, you've got the people working in tourism. They obviously want tourism to restart. And then you've got other people looking at, higher up in government thinking, oh, we don't want all these foreigners walking around the city, blah, blah, blah. They're at a clash, okay? And that's just two sets of people. Think about it as a whole very big, complicated pie. Influences might be in there somewhere as well. So it's not a simple issue. And that's why I've talked for, 45, 50 minutes and don't have a simple answer for you. But I do hope that me ranting and raving for this short time was maybe interesting, maybe insightful. This is what it's like to have a drink with me in a bar, to be honest, and get me started talking about content creators and North Korea. So have that as a bit of a warning if you ever want to buy me a drink. I may not shut up. But I do hope that it was interesting, at least, and gave you some food for thought. And I genuinely am interested in everyone's opinions, especially if they're different from mine. It's very boring when people agree with me. So if you disagree, if you have your own opinions, if you had anything you want to add, if you think that there's something that I left out, please do let me know. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to have a couple of guests on the show. If you have a guest recommendation, please message me, comment. I think you can comment now on Spotify if you're watching on Spotify, if you're listening on YouTube, things like that. Feel free to email me on zoediscovers@gmail.com. You can also message me on Instagram as well. I reply personally to all of my DMs. Thank you if you listened this far. Next week will be much more interesting and less feisty, shall we say. as I chat with Koryo Tour's director, Nick Bonner, who's just a fascinating, fascinating man. And we talk all things Pyongyang International Film Festival, which is in a few weeks from now and which Koryo Tours will be attending. So, very exciting stuff. See you next week.